Hello, my name is Ed Love, and I've been in the music business in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Omaha and southeast Nebraska in general for over 50 years. It's my pleasure to lead this discussion today. We have assembled expert, veteran musicians, teachers, band leaders, entrepreneurs. We're going to just talk a little bit and reminisce. Just to get us started, please identify yourself briefly and tell us maybe when you got into the music business. I'll start over.
I'm Dean Haist. I play trumpet, and I run a business called Arts Incorporated that manages nonprofit arts organizations. I grew up in Hastings, is where I first started playing my trumpet. Went to high school there and came to university in 1971. I think my first paying gig was when the Lincoln Community Playhouse first opened. We did a musical called The Boyfriend, and that would have been early 1972. That's the first thing I remember doing. I actually got a paycheck for something.
Thank you.
Bobby Layne, in the big band business for many, many years.
That's all we get?
Yes, that's it. Next. Anyway, I first started when I was at Waverly High School, and I got a trumpet at Dietz Music Store, 1208 O Street, and took 10 easy lessons. The instructor was Mr. Robinson. And anyway, then went on to play with the Waverly Band. After I got out of high school, I joined the 43rd Army Band, and that was a neat experience because we did shows and parades and concerts and dances and everything else. And so that was a good learning experience. About that time, I formed my first band, which was 8 pieces, not very good, and that was an era when big bands and ballrooms were very popular. This town of Lincoln had 5 ballrooms going strong and many good big bands like Dave Hahn and Bill Albers and so forth. So it was hard for a young band to get a gig. So my first paying job was, the only thing I could get was a wedding dance for my cousin. And I'm still waiting to get paid. But it's been a good ride. I'm still enjoying it, playing all over the country. We played from New York to Branson, Missouri, 17 years, Canada, cruise ships, and so forth. So I'm still enjoying it.
Thank you. I'm Keith Heckman, and I've been in the music business, one form or another, for over 50 years in Lincoln. I was with Dietz Music House for 42 years and played just a little bit of every type of music. I remember my first gig very well. May 28th, 1965, and it was the senior prom for Nebraska, Nebraska. It was a big deal. And I even remember the other 3 players. It was Lee Adams, remember?
Yeah,
the drummer?
oh, sure.
And Steve Larson,
yeah.
And Bill Harshbarger. And I was scared to death. I never played a gig in my life. And I'm a bass player, and I've only been playing bass for 6 months or something. And I said, Steve, I just don't know what to do. And he says, well, just as long as you don't play the same note for 16 measures in a row, you'll probably be okay. So that's how I got started, and I've played over the years a lot of shows in Omaha, Exarban Orchestra, a lot of them with Ed and Dean. Lots of small combo work, big band. I was on Bobby's band for several years, and municipal band, so a taste of just about everything.
My name's Tom Larson. I teach at the University of Nebraska School of Music, and I got started in the music business. Well, really, it goes back to taking piano lessons at the Chimes School, which is over on, it was over on, I think, Jefferson Street, right across the street from Antelope Park. From Miss Hack was her name. And this is sort of interesting because must have been around 1960 or so, and it was on February 6th, 1970, that I played my first gig at the old Pavilion, which is literally a stone's throw from where I took my first piano lesson. But I was playing in a band called Amplified Thought, and like Keith, I was scared to death. These guys called me up on a Monday, asked me if I wanted to join their band. They had heard that my brother was an organist in a band, so they figured that I was too. And in reality, I'd quit taking piano lessons 3 years ago. So they said, "You want to join our band?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I went over. I went over and watched them practice on Monday. They gave me some records. We rehearsed on Wednesday, and the gig was on Friday. And I just remember one of the songs we played was "One is the Loneliest Number," which started off with the organ playing C minor, dun, 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 and I was scared to death that I was going to screw that up. Unfortunately, I didn't. I don't think.
What'd you get paid for that gig?
I have no idea. I just remember there were girls in the audience, and
Say no more. Thank you very much. Moving right along. So, talking about getting paid, Dean, you were in a bunch of rock bands when you were in high school or college, and it was, as someone who was playing music that didn't pay much money, with the symphony, etc., what sort of money were you getting with rock bands?
I got spoiled. I played with a band called Duck with some friends of mine from Hastings, and our logo was the Woodstock guitar. Instead of a peace dove, it had a little duck sitting on it, and we didn't get paid all that much for that group, maybe $50 or so for a gig. But then I joined a couple of bands, the Chancellors and the Elastic Band, and we got paid really pretty well. We got paid $100, $200 or more sometimes. During the summer, we'd get in a bus and travel around the Midwest and play 80 or 90 gigs, and so I didn't have any trouble paying for my college and my car and record collection. I was embarrassed because I go home and talking about what I was getting paid, I realized I was making more than my dad was, but I was young and stupid. I spent it as soon as I had it back then.
Well, and you had to load equipment onto the trailer,
Yeah,
bus and stuff.
yeah.
So I came up in that same era, and I remember you were playing proms in the spring and homecomings in the fall, and there were tons of gigs, and they paid really well.
Yep. So I got spoiled, and then I started playing with the Lincoln Symphony in 1975 maybe, and I worked some with Bill Alber's band then, and I remember the first 2 gigs I did with Bill. I played in Lincoln at the Country Club. It was a 4-hour gig, and then we played a 4-hour gig in Beatrice at some private club there. And a couple weeks later, I got a check for $36, and I'd driven to Beatrice. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's for Beatrice with some mileage, and so I called Bill and asked him about it. No, that's scale, $18 a gig. So that was a surprise from what I had been getting paid. And I don't think the Lincoln Symphony paid much more per service when I started. It seems like it was.
So was Ruben on that?
I think Ruben was in the band at the time, yeah.
Ruben told me a similar story, that he was with Elbers, and they got a job at Fairbury. And Ruben says, well, remember, Bill, I can't go out of town because I got my Dietz music store and all that. And yeah, but this pays more. So, okay, I'll play it. He got his check for $18. And didn't you say it pays more? Yeah, but I'm not reporting this, so I'm not taking any tax out. Anyway, those stories. Well, you were with the Chancellors.
I was, yeah.
My gosh, was Gary Weigert involved in that at
Gary
any
was
time?
there before. I
Okay,
was. There were
all right.
multiple versions of
Yeah.
several of those bands. Bob Coder
Oh,
here in
sure.
Lincoln ran CID Productions,
Yes.
and he had 3 or 4 bands that toured around the Midwest.
Yep.
And I remember when I first joined the Chancellors, it was a union band. Back then, rock bands, his bands were union, and it was because they got a guarantee on the gig if they had a signed union contract. So they marched me down to the union office, and Paul Pierce, I think. And
Mark Pierce.
Mark Pierce,
Yep,
okay, yeah.
yep.
And in the building
It was
over
the
there.
Anderson building.
The Anderson building, yeah.
Yeah,
up in
second or
the-
third floor.
Yeah, up a ways in the air, and I remember I joined the union then because I had to. I didn't even know there was a union at the time, so.
So the Chancellors used to practice right next door to my house because Bob Gingery was the guitar player, and I
Okay.
think he was originally from David City. Is that, I think, what?
Yeah, there were some from around
But
that area.
that was the era when they had a hit song, and I can't remember what the name of the
Oh,
record
yeah,
out.
I think that was before my time. And,
This would have been late 60s,
Yeah.
mid to late 60s, because we moved in there on Mulder Drive in 64. But yeah, at that time, there were garage bands. I mean, the Gingrys were
Everywhere.
next door with the Chancellors, and then down the street was Bruce McCracken and I can't remember the name. Kane was his last name. He was their roadie. He lived down the street. So this band, Music, do you remember this band?
Oh, yeah, that was a great band.
Bruce and Alan McCracken and Gail Cooper and Mark Epp. And I believe one of the Semrads played trumpet in that band. But yeah, it just seemed like when I was I got into 9th grade in 1970 and yeah, something like that. But it seemed like everybody was in a band. So, yeah, you know, I mean, there were gigs to be had and money to be made. And the thing that was really cool about it was that the parents didn't know anything about what we were doing. So we were literally small businessmen. We had to figure out what equipment we needed, how to market ourselves, what songs we needed to play, and you know, what gigs, how much to charge, and all this stuff. You know, we were doing. It was a small business, and like I say, the parents had no idea what we were doing, so they couldn't involve themselves and kind of organize us. We were all on our own. It was a very, very cool time to be to kind of get started in the music business.
And what a great learning experience.
Yeah, it was. It was great.
All those tools that you learned how to use back then are serving you well now.
And you know what? We had competition. We would go hear other bands, and we would say, "Oh man, they learned the Inagata Vita, and the guy played the drum solo exactly like the record." And so, you know, I was like throwing the gauntlet down, and it was it was awesome because you know, there were lots of gigs, and you could go out to you know, all the 13th Amendment is playing at the Old Pavilion, and so we would go hear them, and you know, they had great dance steps, and you know, just the small business aspect of it was something that I didn't even think about it at the time, but that's essentially what it was. You know, it's really, really great.
So the dance steps and all that would be sort of a visual enhancement to what you're doing. Leads me to some of the visual things I remember happening on your bandstand when I was playing with you. And for example, I remember John Berrigan getting up on a chair with an English horn and playing Ragtime Cowboy Joe.
Yes, what a memory.
Well, I sat next to him and watched it happen a few times. So, how did all that develop? I mean, did you know that he played English horn, or did he
I
just
guess
bring
I-
it to a gig? And,
I guess I didn't know that he played it, but we just, English horn alone can be a little boring, so we added a little color, if that's the right word. But we were entertaining the players as well as the audience.
yeah,
You didn't finish that story.
Oh, well, there were other visuals involved, yeah.
But with Berrigan, when he's up on the chair,
Yeah.
they used to roll his pant legs up
Yeah.
and take a lighter and light the hair on his cheeks.
Oh,
It was
dear.
very entertaining for the
Yeah.
dancers.
I don't think
You never did that, did
men
you?
ever lit anything on fire.
Well, I mean, in a band like yours, doing dances around the area, sometimes traveling long distances, you probably need to keep the musicians entertained as much as anything else.
Well, it's true. Along with that is not playing the same tunes every night. You know, just to keep it, oh, I got to read this chart. We haven't played it for a while. But yeah, many, many road stories. And in all the miles, you know, we played Canada to Branson, Missouri every year. And so you get to be a family, and part of that is good, part's not so good. But anyway, that's just part of the business. It's been good.
Well, the ballroom business has changed a lot over the years.
Absolutely.
Maybe, I assume, there aren't as many ballrooms as they used to be, but you would know more than that, more than I.
I was president of the National Ballroom Operators for 2 terms, and when it started out, I mean, we had, this is all the United States, trying to think of how many we had, but a lot of ballrooms. By the time I finished my 2nd term, that had reduced to 50%. And they're disappearing. And it's kind of sad because the ballrooms were the social gathering place for dances, weddings, funeral receptions, all kinds of things. And that's kind of going away, and I miss that part of it.
Yeah, a lot of that being taken over by restaurants and halls that you can rent out that,
Sure.
that don't do dances all the time. They just are rented for special occasions like that.
Yeah.
Lincoln itself has been a very thriving music scene for a long time. Now, I know, Tom, you had a few bands that you and your brother Ted were in or were in charge of. I don't remember all of them, but did you do a lot of your playing here in Lincoln, or did you need to travel a lot too?
We did mostly Lincoln. We didn't really like to travel all that much. I remember one time Bobby called me up and he said, "What are you doing next weekend?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you got?" And he said, "Well, we're playing Friday night in Wichita and Saturday night in Mississippi." And I said,
That was
"Oh
mild
man, I'm
compared
not
to
up to
some.
this." This is back when I was like in my 20s, and I just, I mean, kudos to you for doing this. traveling
However,
so
now
much.
your son is traveling all over the
Yeah, he
country.
is.
Playing with country bands.
Yeah, he's
And
based
doing
in
quite
Nashville.
well, yeah.
But we played mostly Lincoln and Omaha, and there were a lot of places to play. We for a real brief period of time in the 80s, we were kind of the first call wedding band, unless you called Denny's band or something, but we started playing more rock stuff, and so we played at the, what's that big dance that they have at the country club every year in the summer in June?
Not the President's Ball.
No, it's a golf tournament.
Swing Fest.
Swingfest, yeah.
Yeah,
We did that like 4 years in a row, and during that time, we were literally playing something like that, or weddings, Lincoln or Omaha, every weekend from like late April till October. And it was, we called ourselves the Larson brothers, and then later on we called ourselves Shirley's boys because our, you know, mom.
And your dad was a radio announcer or owner of KFOR?
He was
radio?
the manager of KFOR,
Yeah.
Roger Larson.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of where I got my love of technology but he was pretty tone deaf. He didn't didn't know the difference as Ray Haig told me once that there's some people that don't know the difference between a note and a door slam. And that was my dad. My mother was very accomplished violinist and violist, and so that's where we got our music from.
You had mentioned Denny's band. Denny Schneider was the trumpet teacher here at the university. I point behind me because we're sitting in the university for many years, and he started a quintet that played a lot of parties, and Keith and I were part of that band. In fact, I left your band to join Denny's band because he didn't travel as much as you did.
You missed out on a lot.
I know.
But no, Denny was a great person, and everybody liked Denny.
Right.
Yeah, and fantastic trumpet player also. But I know one band was flying into the Flying V at Utica, Nebraska, that big ballroom, and they called me for a trumpet player, and I sent Denny Schneider. And they called me the next day. Wow, you know, what a player. So
Yeah, it was an education.
Yeah.
Standing next to him at all those gigs. I don't remember what year it was. It would have been in the late 70s or the 80s that we had 19 gigs in December. We played a lot at the American Legion Club.
Yeah.
And a lot of weddings and other functions.
Russ Gibson was the piano player for many
Yep.
years in that band.
Mm-hmm.
And Al Ramito.
Alaminos.
Played drums, yeah. Yeah, Russ Gibson was an important figure in the music scene in Lincoln for a long time.
Bill Elber's band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he could play any song written up to 1950 or something in
I
any
remember
key.
he was sort of a Teddy Wilson type of player. I mean, very light touch and lots of runs and stuff.
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah. Brilliant.
you know, speaking of bands, I think we need to, there's one major figure that we lost just this past year, but before we talk about him, perhaps Mac McCune.
Oh, yeah.
These are the two silver-haired trumpet band leaders, Danny and Mac. And
How long did you play with Mac and the Mac 5?
3.5 years with Mac 5. We were at a club called the Akutiki.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And we
saw you there.
played 5 hours a night, 6 nights a week.
No kid.
And
He'd do those long intros.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and there were some, you know, good musicians that filtered through that band. Vic Lewis was with us for quite some time, and that's another topic. The fine musicians that have come out of Lincoln and gone on to much bigger and better things over the years. But yeah, I was with Mac 3.5 years and enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, and were you out of college by then? Or were you
Oh yeah,
still-
I came right out of college.
Okay, so that you were working full-time at the music store or someplace,
Right.
and then all night?
All night there, yeah. And Tony Martinez had been Mac's bass player and left just about the time I graduated, and so I hopped on and had a long ride there. And Mac was just he was a wonderful showman. You know, he could remember everybody's name and what they were going to order and where they were going to sit, and probably knew the names of all their kids. People just gravitated towards him. You know, he looked like $1 million.
he was a classy guy.
Yeah, and every year I worked with him, he got younger. I don't know how. He looked younger
Yeah.
every year, and
Now, his son is playing now, isn't he?
His son is playing, Brian. He's playing, he's back east somewhere.
In the DC area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a pathologist there.
Okay.
And, just plays on the weekends, but he inherited his father's talent.
Oh,
He's
good.
an excellent player.
So here's a little bit of trivia. Brian McCune's son dances for the American Ballet Theater.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the top.
You're about to mention Chuck Pennington. I had lots of opportunities to work for Chuck over the years. He was always a happy person and fun to work with. It was always different when you worked with Chuck. I showed up on a gig once, and it was me and the rhythm section and 4 trombone players. And he'd written out charts for this band with 4 trombones and 1 trumpet. And we played a dance gig with that instrumentation, and he'd show up another time, and it'd be a different group of people. And I always enjoyed working for Chuck. I did a lot of jingles for Chuck up in Omaha, and he did a lot of radio, television, commercials.
Jingles? What's a jingle?
Well, there used to be a lot of recording. Tom would know about that. You were in the
So
recording
there
business.
was a period of time where Chuck and I and Kate Schrader,
Oh, yeah.
and there was a guy named John Rood.
Yeah.
There were a few guys like you and Brian Grasmick and Rich Walter on drums, Brian Sampson on bass, Dave Wampler perhaps on trombone. But I remember I would get a session and I would call up the regulars like you or Brian, and it's like, well, I got a session with Pennington at Sound Recorders at 1 o'clock on Thursday. I would say, okay, could you make it down to Lincoln by 4? It's like, well, yeah, I think so, we can do that. So I'd sometimes have to work around, but the amount of session work that was going on in that period of time, and this again would have been probably in the 80s.
Yeah, early, mid-'80s.
It
Yeah,
was it was unbelievable.
Did a bunch of those with your brother and Red Gretzinger.
Oh,
And
my
so
gosh.
so the sax section was Ed, Ted, Red.
Yeah.
And we did some stuff for Godfather's Pizza and,
That would have been John Rood.
yeah,
He
yeah.
had
and
that franchise. for-
Brian Grasmick.
Ever hear from Red? I wonder.
Red's still in Chicago.
Is he? Yeah.
Steve Hubka goes out to see him every
Oh,
now and then,
okay.
and he's retired. I think he's still living in downtown Chicago and doing pretty well, I think.
He was from a little town around Grand Island, same town that Tom Williams is from.
Scotia.
That's it. That's
Scotia,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
you're right.
Yeah. He used to play with Eddie Haddad's band. We played for a lot of Exarban shows and rode back and forth to Omaha with Red, and he always had an interesting story. He'd seen a lot in his
Yeah.
time.
Oh, yeah.
Those Exarban shows were a big deal in the music scene around here for many years.
It was the world's largest nonprofit membership, I think, at the time.
Exarban is Nebraska spelled backwards, for those of you who,
And they had like, 80,000 members or something like, maybe I'm making that up, but they would bring in acts for a week, Sammy Davis Jr., Wayne Newton, and they would fill the Exarban Arena, which was some thousands of people, and do 8 shows over the course of a week. And people from all around the state would be there. It was set up for educational purposes, scholarships and that sort of thing, but they had 7 or 8 shows that they were doing. That was eventually why I resigned playing in Lincoln Symphony, was because I had a lot more gigs that paid a lot better playing for Eddie Haddad up in Omaha, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, playing for lots
Has
of...
that gone away now?
Pretty well. It still exists. I think they do the coronation, although they've changed things. It's no longer a rich old guy and the daughter of some rich old guy or king and queen. They changed the process, so it's a little more politically
well, but,
correct.
there's no racetrack there, there's
Right.
no giant arena and all that. It's,
So you mentioned Eddie Haddad. We would be remiss for not mentioning Subby Anzaldo.
Oh,
Was the
gosh.
last-
Sure, yeah.
Who's still going strong.
He
Is
is, yeah, he's not doing too well, but
Is that right?
Yeah.
Another
He's still living at home.
contractor booking. But yeah, he and Eddie were sort of the twin peaks of.
Yeah.
In Omaha, yeah, for sure.
I remember one
Now
time
does,
Subby, were you on that Rodney Dangerfield gig? You were.
I was,
Yeah. So
and
Subby,
I've got a tape of it.
I want that tape.
I'll see if I can
So, so it was Al,
Ramito?
Al Ramito, and us two.
And Tuffy.
Was Tuffy on it too?
Tuffy was on
Epstein?
it, yeah.
So we showed up for the rehearsal, and he didn't show up for the rehearsal, which was, the artist always showed up for the rehearsal, if nothing else, just to say welcome. I remember doing the Red Skeleton show, and he showed up, went over to everybody and shook their hand. But Rodney didn't show up. He just gave us a cassette tape, and on the tape it said, "We're going to start off the show with, I'm going to come out, and at this point, at some point, I'm going to introduce the band, and you stand up and give the audience the finger," and, I mean, it was,
And did you?
yeah, we did.
Oh, okay.
But that was a Subby gig. I remember when Subby would call you for a gig, this was back before caller ID. Hello? Subby.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, there were, it's too many stories. I remember that I did the week with Wayne Newton. He had this crazy Italian lead trumpet player named Al Longo, and he had a little cooler with some 100-proof Stoli that he was sipping on through the gig. And we had the rehearsal, and at the first gig, Wayne Newton was out front doing a monologue, and he says, "Here, kid, hold my trumpet. I'm going to do something that you always wanted to do." And so he starts yelling at Wayne Newton. He stands up and he's yelling at him. He's calling him all sorts of obscene names. This was a family show. And they're going back and forth, and finally he climbs up on his chair and he drops his pants. He had bright red underwear that he left on, and moves him. And he sat down and took the trumpet back, and I thought, oh God, he's going to get fired, he won't be back after that. And then he did the same thing every single show. It was all part of the act.
Newton was a wild man. Still is, I think.
Well, he was I remember that show. He played trumpet and violin, and I don't remember what else, and of course sang all the songs that everybody wanted to hear. So, showbiz.
I think it's, not to steal your...
No.
I think it's interesting when you just take a overall view of the music business in Lincoln, how the pendulum seems to swing one direction and then back. I remember in the 60s and the 70s and maybe even in the early 80s, there were 12 to 15 clubs in Lincoln that were running either rock bands or show bands 6 nights a week. And then it just seemed like in the space of 6 months, all that went away, and you couldn't find a gig to save your soul in Lincoln. And the musicians were, bemoaning the fact that there was just no place to play. And fast forward to today, because the musicians were smart enough, like you, to figure out the business and what you had to do to go out and find employment. Because of that thinking, there's probably just as many musicians working today as back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The trouble is, they're in groups of 2 or 3, and they're playing in, 25 or 30 different locations, and mostly on weekends in Lincoln. So the state of professional music in Lincoln it's healthy. It's nothing that we would want to do or probably could do, the type of music. But I think that attests to the entrepreneurship of the younger players today that put together groups and go out and knock on doors, and they create their own jobs. And they may not be making a lot of money, but there's a lot of work going on. You pick up the paper and read down the entertainment guide on the weekends, and there's probably 25, 30 places that are using some type of music 1 or 2 nights a week.
Well, your ballroom is country one night a week. Is that Sundays or?
Yeah, and that's real big.
Sure.
We have 2 country bands, 2 stages. They alternate, free dance lessons, the whole thing. And we'll get an average of 500 to 600 people, college age usually, and a few high school and so forth. And they do all the line dances and the works, and it's and they're doing a lot of ballroom dancing without realizing it. They're doing a cha-cha, the waltz, the swing, and so it's still going on. But yeah, you're right, it has changed a lot. When I got into this, we played strictly ballrooms, and now we do very few. We're doing shows and conventions, and the governor's inaugural ball, we played for 5 different governors, but there's a lot of work out there, and sometimes you have to look for it or create it yourself. And but there's still plenty. And I think Lincoln is very fortunate. I use a lot of players out of Houston, Texas, and at one time their musicians directory was like a Sears Roebuck catalog. I mean, it was giant. And today, those guys are not, they're looking for work.
Do we need to tell our audience what Sears is?
Yes, Sears is dead. Oh, geez. Yeah, they probably hadn't published a catalog for 20 years. Oh, my goodness.
I think there's a lot of music here in Lincoln that's maybe different from other communities. I occasionally go to the International Trumpet Guild Conference and play on one of their programs, and I talk to trumpet players from around the country, and they're just constantly amazed at the number of different things that are available here in Lincoln. Ed and I have been with the Nebraska Jazz Orchestra, started as a neoclassic jazz orchestra in 1975, do a series of concerts. We bring in some really great guest artists. We did a show here at the Lead Center last year with Paul Schaefer. I've been working with the Lincoln Municipal Band that Keith mentioned earlier. That group started playing in Antelope Park in 1907 was what I was told. And still playing 7 Sunday evenings in the summer from July to August, and it doesn't pay great, but it pays.
Better than it used to.
Yeah. I work with a brass quintet called the Nebraska Brass that I helped to start, and we do a series of 25 concerts around the state each year. We are in Sidney, Nebraska on Friday night playing for the High Plains Arts Council on their series of concerts, and yesterday we were in Omaha. We got a couple more concerts, one in Omaha, one in Lincoln and one in Kearney to finish out the series before we take a break. I play with a group called the Nebraska Trumpet Ensemble. We do a couple of concerts each year, and we're working on a series of recitals next year because of Denny Schneider, my trumpet teacher. There are just lots of trumpet players that play really, really well that came out of the School of Music here and have gone on to do other things around the country. So we're inviting some of them to come back and do some trumpet recitals next year. There's a series of concerts that we produce at the Lincoln Community Foundation in their garden from May through August, and then this year they've expanded May through September. So there's a different group every Wednesday at noon. Work with a group called the Capital Jazz Society. We've been producing live jazz on Mondays, pretty much every week for some years now. As is typical with that group, we just lost our venue last week, so we're looking for a new home, but I'm sure we'll find some place to play.
But a lot of that you've created. You beat the bushes, and if something goes away, you start a new one. And some people just wait for the gig to come in. So
well, I was in that position that Keith mentioned
Yeah.
in the 80s or so. I was playing all the time. I was working pretty regularly with Dwayne Schultz and playing a lot of Omaha and a lot of jingles, and I played on the road with Dennis Wesley for a couple years, and I remember one summer, I'm looking at my calendar and how am I going to pay my rent? I don't have enough gigs. And so that was kind of when I decided that I would spend more of my energy trying to create things that I liked to play and not have to wait for the phone to ring so much. So I kind of, expanded on that in the last 25, 30 years. And I get to play a lot of things that I really like, that challenge me. And I still get called, but I don't, I'm not always able to do things as much because of my schedule, but I like the variety.
Yeah. Well, I play in a chamber music group that got started because the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra was in financial difficulty, and they decided instead of raising more money, they would cut the orchestra down in size so they wouldn't have to pay so many people. And they cut, and they would select repertoire that wouldn't use 3 flutes, they just used 2, and likewise clarinets, oboe. And so the third flute player, Becky Van de Bogart, and the third bassoon, Karen Sandine, started a chamber music group that they called the Third Chair Chamber Players, and that's still going. It's changed its name to the Nebraska Chamber Players, but again, people that weren't playing as much as they used to, and they created the opportunities for themselves.
And there's some other things, you've been so good about creating all these opportunities with your Arts Incorporated organization, and Becky and Karen started that, but like the Stransky Part series, that started, there was, what's his name, Jim Haist, I think is his name, he just started.
KZUM?
Yeah, he
Radio.
turned it over to KZUM now,
Yeah.
and I mean, that thing is amazing. They
Oh,
get
yeah.
a lot of people there. I think it's
Yep.
on Thursday nights throughout the summer. Of course, we have Jazz in June right over here. And there's other, I can't think of, help me out here. There's some other things like that. What's the thing over at First Plymouth? They've got a series, Bobbin Music.
Yeah,
is that
sure,
it?
that's-
But there's a ton of those types of things that are going on.
There's a First Friday Jazz series at
First Lutheran
First Lutheran
Church.
Church. There's a Friday noon series now at St. Paul Methodist Church.
Yeah, actually, St. Paul started theirs before the Lutheran Church did theirs.
Brian
First
Fultner has a program at First Presbyterian Church. There's really,
Arts for the Soul.
right, so really a lot. And
South
you know,
Point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, South Point has
Yeah.
that thing on Friday nights.
And this building we were sitting in, the Lead Center, that really changed a lot of things in Lincoln. It brought in world-class groups of every kind, and occasionally those groups would hire local musicians. They received some money to bring in more Broadway shows. They did Book of Mormon here in December. This next fall they're doing Phantom of the Opera for 2 weeks, doing a weekend of White Christmas. And so that's opened up opportunities for local musicians to do that sort of thing.
And there's a couple of other smaller lead-type venues in Lincoln, the Rococo Theater and
Yep.
also the Bourbon Theater that are, having national or semi-national acts.
And the Pinnacle Bank.
Yeah, the Pinnacle Bank Arena.
Now
Yeah.
there's that.
Well, there's a summer series now at Pinewood Bowl. A
Yes.
couple years back, the city approved the sale of alcohol, which makes those concerts a lot more economically feasible, and they've improved the facilities there. And
Right.
a couple summers ago, I hired the musicians to play in the Temptations horn section. They were scheduled to play outside in Chicago, and they moved it inside to Pinnacle Bank, and
They've
Pinnacle
got
Bank's got some
Steely
great
Dan,
acts.
Yeah,
Steely
yeah.
Dan's coming there this summer, aren't they? I mean, it's
And
just-
Weird Al Yankovic.
Well, and Weird Al is
With a
hiring a full
41-piece
orchestra, yeah. So there's a lot more different things like that that are available now than there were when I first grew up. That was really limited to the dance bands and the orchestras. and really not much else when I started playing in the early 70s.
Well, the Pinnacle Bank and this edifice, raised the bar so high for our city. And it seems like we got to a certain plateau as far as people that wanted to come to Lincoln, Nebraska and perform. And when we got there, it just exploded. There's just all kinds of acts that come in that never would have given Lincoln a second thought before.
Jay-Z, Paul McCartney, I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
Cher.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, Lincoln's really grown, it seems like when I first came here in the early 70s, it was 150,000 or so people maybe, and it's over 250,000 people now. That's a lot of folks for Lincoln, Nebraska.
So I think I'm going to get a little political here. Today is the last day of the Chris Beitler administration. I think he's been a mayor that has been a huge friend of the arts with the way he's promoted things. But the Pinnacle Bank Arena emerged during his 12 years. So, yeah, just give a little shout out to him. But
he's been really active and involved with the Lincoln Arts Council, which has been a real positive thing on the arts in Lincoln in general. They do a summer arts festival, and they were instrumental in that first big public art project, the Tour to Lincoln thing. I was on the board when they did that with the bicycles all around town. And there's been multiple public art projects. I mean, pretty much every corner now has some kind of public art projects.
Hands or bicycles.
Which is cool, It's interesting and decorative, and the mayor had a lot to do with supporting that.
I think another thing that's interesting about Lincoln is any night of the week, all year long, there's probably 15 or 20 performances of some type going on in this community. Mm-hmm. And at least half of them are free. Whether it's, it may be music, it may be an art exhibit, it may be poetry reading, the community playhouse, what have you. And just to have a community that has that many opportunities for the citizens, I think is really unusual and speaks well to a lot of good leadership, not only from the mayor's office and the Arts Council, but a lot of people behind the scenes serve on boards and contribute money, just make Lincoln a really special place. And I think a hotbed for future musicians if they're willing to get out and be a little creative.
And that doesn't even start talking about theater. I mean,
That's right, yeah.
musical theater. I'm looking across the street at the Temple building here, where the Nebraska Repertory Theater does a lot of their work, and a bunch of theater companies have sprung up over the years, some of which, like the Community Playhouse, will hire musicians.
Well, and Bob Rook down at Tada, and
Indeed.
yeah, there's just an ocean of opportunities out there.
And, it isn't part of this discussion. We have another panel that's going to be talking about, I don't know what the term is, popular music, if you will. What you hear when you go downtown on a Friday or Saturday night here in Lincoln, and you walk down O Street, there's a half a dozen or more bars that have live music. I'm not a part of that scene. I don't know, if they're getting paid or how much. I know I've played at the Zoo Bar quite a bit, and those musicians do okay. But there's a lot of music that I'm too old. I'm out of it. I don't know and I don't personally like a lot of that music. But it's certainly live in Lincoln with a number of clubs that have live music on a regular basis.
I think another Lincoln institution we should shout out to is Dietz Music. They've been,
1208 O Street.
Used to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
used to
well,
be. Many years.
Yeah.
Was John Schildnick there when you
I bought
started?
him out. Oh, he was there when I started working up in the shop as a repairman with
Okay.
Mark Pierce.
Yeah.
And then he wanted to retire. And John and his partner, which is Bob Fenton, Doug's dad.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't play well together. And when John would come up to Bob and say, "Oh, I think I'd like to sell my stock to so-and-so," Bob would say, "No, I don't think I could work with that guy." And then Bob would suggest somebody and go to John, and John says, "I'm not going to sell my stock to him." They sold the stock to me because I was the only one they could agree on. That's the only reason. They just came to me and they said, "Would you like to buy some stock?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." And took me down and sat me down in the piano room and said, "It's all yours." That was my indoctrination, and that was 42 years I was there.
Well, and Dietz has supported the arts financially for many years. I mean, the Nebraska Jazz Orchestra is still using the Dietz piano that has contributed to our concerts, and I know Dietz has, certainly while you were there, contributed money to a lot of different
They still do. They contribute to most of the organizations I work with and others that I'm aware of in the community.
That's part of being in the community. You have to give back to all the people that take care of you. So we're pleased to do it.
I remember in 1972, I needed a new horn. And I went down to Dietz Music, and Reuben Hahn was there.
Yep.
And he showed me a nice, shiny Bach trumpet, and boy, I thought that'd be great. And I didn't have much money, and I said, well, let me think about it. And I went down the street to Schmidt Music down the street.
Molzers.
Molzers.
Waltz.
No, on
Well, there was
There were two of
Schmitz.
them right next to each other.
There was Waltz, and
Yeah.
Schmitz bought out Waltz.
Okay, I think it was Schmidt's. It was on O Street, a block or so west.
Close, yeah.
So I went down there, and they gave me a slightly lower price. And then I went back to Reuben, and I said, well, they offered it. And so he lowered the price. I went back to Schmidt's again, and they lowered a little bit more. And I went back to Reuben. Now he's mad. And he says, all right, here's what it is. And he says, but don't come back here again. So I bought my Bach trumpet from Reuben, and we became good friends after that. He was a great trumpet player.
Oh,
Nice
yeah.
guy.
And that's
Oh,
from
yeah.
a guy that the last 40 years of his life never owned a trumpet. You know, he was a great,
yeah.
great trumpet player, and he'd never practice. And anytime you say, you know, Reuben played a double high C, you know, he always had it, but never practiced. But he never owned a horn because every night when he left the store to go to a dance job, he'd just pull a brand new horn right off the shelf, take it, play the gig, polish it up, put it back on the shelf the next morning.
Got to keep them working.
Keith, did you know his dad, Dave?
Dave.
He had a band and a music store
Yeah,
in this town.
yeah, yeah. I never knew Dave other than by reputation.
Yeah.
But I know he had a popular band.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good band. He had a Chicago arranger, and the arrangements were really tough, but he was a good band.
I'm pretty much at the
We
bottom of my
exhausted your
Yeah,
list?
I'm exhausted.
Looking at the future for this town, just some ideas. At the Playmore, I've started a program with two high school. We have two high school jazz bands. We have two stages. And they get to come out and play for a dance. Their parents are there with the cameras, and it's a real neat experience, and some really good musicians.
Yeah.
Just amazing at high school age level. It's a real good experience, and you hope that they're exposed to some of this where they might go on and do things with it.
Yeah, you got to try to get them hooked when they're young. I think that's a business model that works for a lot of things. But
The enthusiasm is
yeah,
just wonderful.
The Nebraska Jazz Orchestra has educational components. We feature young talent. I hate to use that word. Young musicians that on two of our concerts, and we used to do a jazz camp, but that isn't happening anymore. And so they need all the encouragement they can get. we're the mentors now, I guess.
Yeah, the Capital Jazz Society has a Monday night big band that plays a couple times a month. And one of the premises of that group is that the second and third set is open to anybody who wants to sit in. So musicians from the community, and often there'll be a number of high school kids that will come down there. There's a couple of really good high school jazz bands in the city. A couple of weeks ago, we had 8 or 9 kids from Lincoln East High School that came in and sat in, and they played really well. It was a lot of fun, and I just, I wish I had something like that when I was growing up. There wasn't anything like that in Hastings. There wasn't anything like that in Lincoln. You could go to whatever the bar was south of the music building and you could hear Mac play, but there wasn't really any place you could go sit in. So it was.
Southwest has some amazing players. We've had them several times. We'd have them out to open for the Tommy Dorsey band or Glenn Miller, and then they would join those musicians and all play together. Yeah, it's you expose them to a lot of neat things.
I think Keith mentioned earlier something about the musicians that have grown up here in Lincoln.
Oh,
and that,
yeah.
Have gone on to do other things. Trumpet players, Lori Frink
Yeah.
was going to school, and she went on to play with Jerry Mulligan's big band and
Benny Goodman.
and Ray Schneider's jazz orchestra in New York, and really became quite well known both for trumpet playing and her teaching. And Dave Brown from Fremont.
Yeah.
Dave played a lot of Broadway shows and played on the soundtrack for a couple of movies. The Cotton Club was one that I went out to New York City with Brian Grassmick, and we listened to him record some of those tracks. It was very, very fascinating to be
Don
that close to
Gorder.
the business. Yeah, Don Gorder.
He was just here.
He was?
He got an alumni recognition award because he started that music law
Yeah,
program at the
yes.
Berkeley School of
In
Music.
Boston.
Yeah.
And lots of trumpet players. The jazz orchestra just had our guest artist on the last concert was our first young artist winner, Frank Basili, a baritone saxophone player who grew up in Omaha. And Frank's played on the road with Michael Bublé. He's
Count Basie, the
he's,
Vanguard Jazz
like
Orchestra.
first or second call for a lot of things in New York City now.
Very sax player.
Very sax player, yeah. And when he was here just this last week, he was talking about the month before he'd spent 19 days in Belgium and a week in France, and then was back here touring the Midwest. He had a gig lined up in Chicago after he played with us, and took the train overnight to Chicago. So you want to take the train then? Well, yeah.
Whatever.
But lots of players, really.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just,
Well, James Valentine,
yeah.
playing lead guitar player in Maroon 5. There's another guy, Nick Semrad, who is part of this is a venerable family, musical family, I think out of Fremont. But one of his, either his dad or his uncle or somebody played in the Flippers, which was a show band from
Fabulous Flippers,
Yeah,
yeah.
Fabulous
Bob.
Flippers.
Bob Samrad.
Yeah, Bob Samrad,
Trumpet
yeah.
player.
But Nick is, he was gigging around town. He played a lot with Darryl White, and then he just decided he was going to move to New York. And check him out on YouTube or on Facebook. He is probably he's a hired gun, and he's got sponsorships from Yamaha and Dave Smith, who's the guy that created the Prophet and the Prophet synthesizer back in the 70s, and all kinds of things. He's literally traveling all over the world. He's like the hired gun keyboard player. Who else am I thinking of that has really done well?
This is one of my former trumpet students, Nate Walcott. Grew up here in Lincoln, and he's worked
Keyboard
with.
player now, isn't he?
Well, he plays keyboard now with a lot of groups. He did some recording with Connor Oberst and Bright Eyes, and did a lot of arranging for some of those indie rock groups out of Omaha. Right now, he's on the road playing keyboard with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and touring around the world and doing really well for himself.
Kyle Ryan, Kyle Hurlbut. He went to East High, moved down to Nashville. He's playing with Casey Musgraves now. He's produced one of her albums. I mean, he's just not a big name. He's just one of these behind the scenes type of guys in Nashville, but he's a Lincoln boy.
Well, so there's another avenue of making money in the music business, not necessarily being on the stage, and you can speak to a lot of that since...
Well, one of the questions that you gave us was, is this a good time for a young person to get in the music business? And on the surface, the answer might be no, because as we've mentioned, the live scene is kind of going away, and I don't know if it's ever going to be what it was. On the other hand, I really believe that the music business writ large is undergoing some big changes, and that means that there's going to be some winners and losers. It's like if you're a coal miner today, you're probably not going to have much job security. However, if you get into some of these other high-tech things in Silicon Valley or places like that. But so the problem is I don't know what those jobs are in the music business. I'm kind of left that. But I just wonder if this might actually be a good time if you're looking at a more entrepreneurial type of bent, or because it's still, even though the live gigs are kind of, to an extent, they're going away. It's still a really big industry.
There's probably more money being made in the music industry now than there ever has been.
Yeah.
A lot of it's going to rap artists. There's an awful lot of money out there. It may not be spread around as much as it used to be, but you look at the number of records, recordings, not necessarily records, because everything now is streaming. But there are new avenues for making money now that didn't exist even 10 years ago, like getting paid for writing the soundtracks to video games, and the streaming music. They're getting a few cents on every play off the streaming venues now. So,
Well, I think it just, so all of us here to some extent figured out early on that you can't just play, and you got to have some other component going to kind of make it in Lincoln.
Right.
And I think the people that go into the business today that just want to play, they're, just like when back in the 60s and 70s or before that, when we got started, well, depending on how good you are, unless you're really, really good, that's going to limit you to an extent. I just kind of have a feeling, like I said, I don't know what they are, but there's got to be a whole new world of opportunities out there for entrepreneurial-minded musicians today. And I think it's in sort of a bit of the music business is in a bit of a turmoil right now, and so when things get righted, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. So I don't know.
Survival of the fittest.
I think, well, yeah.
The cleverest.
What would you, if you had the opportunity to go back in today's world and be 20 years old again, would you look at that as an opportunity or a threatening proposal?
Well, I think so, because, we just backed Tony Bennett. We're working with people all around the area, not necessarily all in Lincoln, but there's a lot of that going on yet. And, if you want to research it, it's out there.
See,
but if you want to wait for the gig, it might not happen.
I have a feeling if you were 20 years old, you'd figure it out today. You'd figure it out and do really well.
Well, it's been a good ride. I mean, what other business can take you to New York and Las Vegas and South Padre Island and Canada and cruise ships and get paid for it? So you know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that
Nice suit.
I've, you know, playing with different groups, I've really had an opportunity to get around the world. It's, you know,
Yeah.
I would never have that opportunity without music. You know, my brother, who's an actuary, who's doing quite well financially, you know, just finally looking to retire and doing some travel. And, you know, my sister has not had as many opportunities to travel, and I kind of taken some of that for granted. And it's really been because of the different music groups and the different opportunities playing my trumpet that I've been able to, you know, get around where I have.
We just played your theater in Hastings.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Shrine Theater.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of a nice venue.
Masonic Temple?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw my first circus there.
Are you referring to our music?
That was my first, no, that was my first public performance was in that building.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In fourth grade, and I played Tonette, and we played the Bluebells of Scotland, and there were probably 40 or 50 of us that they lined up in front of the stage, and we all played it in unison.
Sure you
And
did.
I was scared to death. My knees were shaking. I thought everybody was listening to me and watching my fingers, and
But it's a
Forgot
nice,
about that.
nice venue with the balcony and all of
they've
the
done a lot of work on it.
stuff
Yeah.
that they, it's 100 years old, I think. Anyway,
Dean, speaking of circus, we just finished the circus here
I guess.
last month. And this was my 50th year playing in the
wow.
band for the Shrine Circus. That's a lot of elephants.
Yeah.
A lot of elephants.
Well, there used to be, you know, the Ringling Brothers used to come through Lincoln and Omaha both, and it's not a circus, but they did the Ice Capade show up in Omaha for a week every year, and
Disney on Ice.
yeah.
Lipizzan stallions
Yeah,
used
yeah.
to hire. I
Yes.
remember playing some really hard music behind these horses. You know, couldn't they dance in the key of F?
One of the gigs I used to do every year was for Eddie Haddad up in Omaha. We'd play the boat show. And, you know, you set up the band near the pool. Joe Genovese was always complaining because it gets splashed, you know, from the water. And I don't remember, you played music for all these different entertainment events at a boat show. And, well, things like that just don't happen anymore.
Remember, Eddie Haddad always had a cigar,
Yeah.
but he never lit it,
No.
you know.
That's why he lived so long.
I guess, yeah.
Eddie was a nice man.
He was, he really
He
was.
taught me a lot about the business. He'd always, or at least I always got paid more than scale. Not a lot, but sometimes depending on the gig. And he always made it very clear. There'd be a little note that goes with your check and it'd say, here's how much scale is. And then there's always something extra down at the bottom, so you felt special.
Was Bill Erickson on that?
Bill played with Eddie quite a bit.
Yeah, that's,
I played with Bill and Joe Genovese both with the
Oh, yeah.
Union Pacific Gemütlichkeit German band. Lots of big businesses used to have their own company band, and it had kind of dwindled down to an 8 or 9 piece Dixieland polka band, and we used to play I was with them for about 10 years, and we used to play Family Day celebrations all around the country, wherever the Union
Sure.
Pacific Railroad went. We had our own railroad car that
Yep.
the stage folded out, and you'd sit up in the middle of, I don't know, someplace hot, Salt Lake City or Texas, and we play from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. You play, you know, an hour and take a 10-minute break, and you play an hour and take a 10-minute break.
you've traveled more than I have.
It was, that was a hard.
Was
hard
Tootie
gig.
months on that?
Tootie wasn't, but I
Okay.
played a lot of gigs with Tootie.
Yeah,
He played with
yeah.
Eddie Haddad's band for a long
Sure.
time.
Eddie would always do just something nice, something special for you on a gig. I remember on those Exarban shows, at that time I was secretary of the Musicians Association here, and the last night of the show, he'd always come in with a brown paper sack And he'd say, here are those contracts I promised to file with you. And he'd slide the thing in my case, brown paper sack. It was always a nice bottle of Cavassier. He knew I liked it, But he'd never forget you, if you do something nice for
What
him.
a gentleman he was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
You're talking about polka bands, et cetera. There's certainly a bunch of those that used to be in the area. One of the first bands I played in high school was a Polish polka band in Omaha. It was called Lenny Rich and the Polish Playboys. Yeah.
I always say that's where he learned all the hard to play stuff in the wrong keys. Because that Polish music is just, it just wild.
Yeah, the clarinet.
Yeah.
Lenny would transcribe all the charts from Chicago polka records. And the clarinet parts were etudes. They were just
Never
nasty.
quits.
Nasty.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I played with a bunch of other polka bands around the area. I'm
They've
half
gone
Czech,
away.
so I can't say no to a polka gig, well, at least once from each band I play with.
We had many in this area.
Yeah.
Ernie Kuchera and Matt Slatke, Al Grebenik, and it just goes on
Adolf
and on.
Nemitz.
Yeah, and that's kind of gone away,
I was going to say, one other thing I think that has had an impact on why there's so much music here in Lincoln is the University of Nebraska. They've had a strong school of music. They've had not only some good teachers, but some really outstanding musicians that were teachers that have, taught countless people how to play, and also participated in the community, playing with different groups, playing with the symphony, and that and having it be the state capital, and it's a pretty well educated community, a lot of bright people here, young people, and I think that was a big part of it, just having that school of music and that opportunity to learn. I had a lot of great instructors there.
Sure.
There's
Well,
always
that's,
been- There's always been a really tight connection between the school of music and the Lincoln Symphony, for instance. I remember Emanuel Wishnow was the violin professor here that my mom studied with, and he was, I think, wasn't he the concert master for many years at the symphony? And then he was replaced by, help me out with this.
Arnold
Arnold Schatz, yeah.
Oh, gosh, yes. Remember
And
the board meetings with Arnold Schatz?
so, and yeah, there's still many of my colleagues over there that are playing with the symphony. Karen Becker, Diane Barger, Scott Anderson. So yeah, I think the university's been
well, that's certainly
traditionally-
one of the main reasons why the Nebraska Jazz Orchestra exists is back in 1970, whatever it was, when the band was founded, it was because John Tavlin didn't have a band to play in anymore after he got out of college. So he bought a bunch of music and got a big band together.
And
still
Denny
going.
was running the jazz ensemble program at UNL at the time, and it was a lot of fun. You had some road trips and some concerts, and you played with some great guest artists, and it was fun music. And then you get out of school and you're the old man now, and there's no place to play. So we started rehearsing and playing all the songs that were too hard for us that we wanted to play because it was fun to listen to, and that was good for us.
Indeed.
I've got a great Denny story. When I was in that band, we played this one chart called Groovin' Hard, and we just practiced that. It seemed like every day, and it was, from my perspective, it was pretty simple. The chords are pretty simple, and that's the only chart I remember. The week that Denny died, I was helping a yeah, he was a composition DMA student, but he wanted to take some jazz piano lessons. And he came in for his lesson that very week, and he said, well, we're playing a chart that in the big band, and I wonder if you could help me with it. And he opened his folder, and it was grooving hard. It was the same sheet of music that I had in my folder back in 1974. It was, it's like,
The good stuff lasts forever.
That's a good way to end this. Well done.
Yeah, that's a good line.
Yeah, thank you all for doing this.
Thank you.